Oh God. No, okay. I'm blanking everything. You know what? Well, welcome to chatting today. Ray Edgar, former Sergeant Major, Command Sergeant Major of 573 Cav, very lengthy U.S. Army career, and I'm really happy to talk to him today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. There's a delay. I'm guessing because you're in Washington and I'm in Maine or something, and it's gotta go all through the interweb to get to Maine.
Yeah, and I'm on Comcast, and kind of lucky to just have internet with them at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was you and Roy Orrin got together talking and decided, you know what, we should start doing some memories, recollections, and just sharing things about our past, our service, and especially our time together with 573 and Diyala Province.
Yeah, it's weird that, when he mentioned it, I realized that, we tell a certain part of our story, but we've never really tried to put any major effort into recording. And every time I talk to
Mm-hmm.
somebody, I hear something different. Like when I was talking to him, it was about a different subject. It was about him coming to Warrior Path, and what we talked about was the night in the canal. And I have bits and pieces. I was a little bit further away from the directly that couple hundred meters back away from where those guys were, but he started telling me a story about when the bombs started coming in, they were danger close, and how Johnny Carson, his commander, kept jumping on top of him to protect him. Those are the types of things
Mm-hmm.
that I knew the guys were getting after it, and but there's still stories to be told. Clearly, that's not something that I was aware of. I mean, I always knew Johnny was a great leader. All the commanders were, but when you start hearing stories like that, that's reminiscent of something you might see in a movie.
Yeah, I very much noticed over the years that, especially the closer you are to an event, your recollection of it tends to be a lot more technical. When you read through a lot of the statements in the Headhunter book, thank you, Peter, for writing that. A lot of those are very technical, but we were also giving those just a few short years after. Now there's been more time. People have been able to calm down and kind of get in touch with their emotional side of things again. And also, one of the themes that's come up talking to everyone recently is you don't necessarily realize what you went through was special and unique until you have something to compare it against. And with time behind it, I think a lot of us have realized just how unique an experience the entire event and unit was.
Yeah, I knew during, like, when I arrived there, I had been in the 82nd two other times, so I had been there 6 years previously, but I'd spent 9 years away. I left as a platoon sergeant and didn't think that I would be able to go back there because my MOS wasn't, there
Mm-hmm.
was only one position that I could have taken, and that unit, the armor battalion, had been deactivated. So when I was asked to go back there, I was I couldn't, I was really surprised and excited. But as soon as they asked, which squadron do you want to go to? Because apparently they'd sent some other people there that didn't fare so well. So I
Mm.
was already labeled as a turd because they had sent other armor NCOs there. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Sergeant Major, they can't run, they can't do this, they can't
Mm-hmm.
do that. You better not be like them. I was like, oh shit, right off the bat, like, when you hear the stories of
Mm-hmm.
the new privates coming to 573, my story, strangely enough, was very similar, going back to the 82nd after 9 years as a command sergeant major, um, and being basically told by the division sergeant major, hey, they sent two other dudes. One had a profile, and then the other one had a
Mm.
mustache, which is the cardinal sin.
I
So,
remember him.
but I,
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, when I got to 573, just like everyone else's story, I, my first day of work was a Sunday, and we were at the shoot house, and it went on like Donkey Kong from that point forward. I knew that we had the training, the operational tempo of the training, the realism of the training, and just the type of people in the unit were different than other units I had ever served in. And kind of what solidified it was when we won all the events in All American Week. Every
Mm-hmm.
time I'd been there before, my unit won some, like, oh, the truck pull, or the friggin' chainsaw juggling or whatever. But I mean, to win, we had all those trophies, and I put them out on the front lawn of our Den Street. Colonel's like, you think that might be too much? I was like, I don't think so. The
Mm-hmm.
So I knew then, and then when we went to JRTC, and
Mm-hmm.
the OCs were like, we've never seen a unit like yours. And in particular, there was a circumstance where uh, elements of Charlie Troop were in a built-up area and they started getting surrounded by the enemy, and the entire squadron left. We had this fob, and my guy that was watching me, he's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "We're going out to, fix this situation."
Hmm.
He's like, "Well, aren't you going to set up casualty checkpoints, CCPs? I'll do my platoon sergeants and medics do that shit. We're going about to
Hmm.
go get after it." So the whole squadron went out there, and we ended up obviously repelling the enemy attack. Johnny Carson came up with a quick, we called it the Battle of Madalsari, drew a quick battle plan, and that was when I knew things were different. And throughout the course of that, at the end, they told us they had never seen anybody quite as tenacious as we were. And funny, I used to joke while we were deployed. I remember during Turkey Bowl 2, like you had mentioned, that weather was horrific, and I remember talking to somebody in the back of a Bradley. I think maybe somebody from Charlie Troop, and I was like, "Dude, it still doesn't suck as bad as JRTC did."
I think I had similar sentiments. I remember being knee deep in mud and cold for 2 weeks and sitting around over a campfire in a goat pen somewhere, just talking with the Joes, going, "God, it's still better than being back stateside." Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So the unit, coming in at the ground level, I really didn't know what to expect because I'd never been anywhere else. But I definitely noticed, like you said, there were a lot of hard chargers. There were a lot of really intelligent, really driven, and motivated individuals. And a lot of that came from the command decision on how they put together teams. What was your experience being able to choose that? What kind of guidance did you have working with that? And I don't know, just what was your thought process as we were standing the unit up and you had to choose leaders?
So by the time that I arrived in December of
Mm-hmm.
2005. A lot of that was done, and I was kind of dealing with the aftermath of who wasn't getting to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And it became to the point where it was like we would have these large formations, and it would be like, all right, you're on the team and you're not on the team. And the colonel and I sat down. I was like, I don't, he kind of brought it up, and then I realized perhaps that's not the best way to go about it. So we tried to do a little bit. A lot of the people had been selected, but then there was still more people to select. So here's an example of how we got Walker Gorham, one of our
Mm-hmm.
platoon leaders, was walking up Ardennes Street, and I was going out to Sicily drop zone for some event. And I told whoever I was driving, was probably Stiegel. I said, "Hey, stop the Humvee. Let me talk to this cat." I mean, you could
Mm-hmm.
tell he was built. I was like, "We need a
Mm-hmm.
guy like that." So I grabbed him, and he actually rode out to Sicily. I said, "I want you to meet my commander. I want you in our unit." Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so we ended up. He had already been assigned to a different squadron, and we got in trouble by the G1. The colonel and I. This is something people probably don't know. He and I were in
Mm-hmm.
trouble all the time for something. I mean, not in big trouble,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, but the type of stuff that, this type of stuff you guys would do in the barracks, but we're doing something at a higher level that was drawing attention to us. So
Mm-hmm.
that was an example of kind of, we would see a person, the potential that they had, and find a way to keep them. I did some phone calls to the Department of the Army to try to keep people from going on recruiting duty and other assignments. And then there was a lot of something else that was different in other units that I had deployed with. There were people that were trying to get out of going, like had
Mm-hmm.
excuses. And when that happened in our unit, we had a lot of injured people from
Mm-hmm.
jumps and training events and stuff. And there was and you were one of them. They came into my office and said,
Mm-hmm.
I need to go on this deployment. And I'll never forget it. I just had a staff sergeant come in and talk to me about his low back pain. I'm like, "Bitch,
Mm-hmm.
you don't even know what low back pain is. I'm old enough to be your father."
Mm-hmm.
So after that, I was frustrated. I was like, "I hope this isn't what we're going to be dealing with." And I was working a lot with the medics, with Brad Rather and everybody, to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we had a large enough organization to deploy. And other than that one person, and there was another cat that wanted to go to SFAS, and I don't remember who he was, and he didn't make it. And then he wanted to come back to the unit, and I was like, "Sorry, too
Mm-hmm.
late." But the rest of you guys, that I remember, you coming in, the kid from Charlie Troop, God, I can't remember his name. He had screws in his ankle. and I could see them. I'm like, can you
Hmm.
push them in? That's kind of obvious. Can we, they're sticking out of your boot.
Hmm.
So we ended up, that was another way that we kind of, those people were already part of the unit, but we
Hmm.
wanted to make sure that we held on to them. And as far as, the officer teams, most of them had been built with the exception of some of the lieutenants, like I said, when we grabbed Walker Gorham.
Yeah, I just on the bottom end of it, I noticed when you fill good leadership roles, it it passes down, but it also motivates people too. There was a lot of people. I remember a lot of people just talking as the unit was being stood up, especially after JRTC, that wanted to come over and wanted to deploy with us. They just saw kind of how the teams were working, how things were going, all the schools, and all of that really meshed together very well. I know that was partly because I've been told you were given a lot of choice, from General Caldwell on down on who you were going to choose, how it was going to put together, and it really reflected top to bottom. One of the things that's come up a lot in these talks is how even ranks that traditionally would not be doing important things. Important tasks. Like we had, E3, E4 FOs that were calling in and adjusting fire during operations. We had E3, E4 medics that were doing 9 lines and setting up CASEVACs and medevacs, with helicopters. Things that when I left for bigger army later, I've people thought I was lying when I would tell them about those things. And part of what I love is some of those incidents were captured on camera. Jesse McDonald became the meme, but we had a lot of memes for a while. We had so much media that came out of that deployment just because things were operating so well together. It was clicking so well that so many eyes were watching what was happening. And that was a really amazing thing to be a part of.
Yeah, we were given, we had access to equipment that due to Colonel Pappas knew some people. So we had some equipment that other units didn't have that we were testing. Um, we had, and as you said, I knew something was different about our unit because the roles were blurred, which in the past, I always, in some of the units I'd served with before, the officers did not lead the way that our officers did. A lot of you couldn't even, for the first couple of months that I was in the unit, people were calling me sir and calling Colonel
Mm-hmm.
Papa Sergeant Major and vice versa. Like they didn't know, which I
Mm-hmm.
see as a good thing. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, jackass, if you don't know who we are, there's pictures of us on the wall
Mm-hmm.
up there. But when we first started, there weren't those pictures. And I thought,
Mm-hmm.
this is fantastic. They don't know who the commander or the sergeant major is because
Mm-hmm.
he would scuff someone up just like I would scuff someone up. And
Mm-hmm.
I could sit at the big boy table and give input for tactical type of things. And I saw that was one of the things that I really believe made our unit different, just like you had alluded to in some of the other interviews. Paratroopers in World War II just linked up with whoever they could link up with
Mm-hmm.
and took the fight to the enemy. And I saw that we had sergeants because the commander and I knew that this was a decentralized fight.
Mm-hmm.
And from the onset, I told people, sergeants are going to we both knew sergeants were going to be making decisions that in other units, a company commander may have made
Mm-hmm.
a decision to, call for fire, a decision to engage the enemy. And that allowed us to not only take the initiative but to maintain the initiative throughout the time we were
Mm-hmm.
there.
Yeah, I part of the organizational culture that I like to say, that I noticed was how leaders really knew who their soldiers were and their personalities and their capabilities. They were watching really closely, and you did feel that at all times. I talk a lot about Alpha Troop just because that's where I served, so I'm closest to it. But I know my CO, Captain Few, before we ever left, he knew our personalities and individually would approach you with different things. Sometimes it was knowing a right school, a right place to put you. Sometimes it's daring you to get naked and chase Charlie Troop at JRTC. We don't talk about that story a lot, but he knew different ways to challenge each of his soldiers. And then when we got overseas, he was able to use that adaptability and flexibility and have the benefit of knowing that higher command, you and Colonel Pappas, would allow him that flexibility to begin doing those kind of surge tactics, the coin tactics, before it was ever implemented. And that resulted in other things like Josh Kinzer, who had been, I, I'm forgetting if he came in at an E5 or E6 at the time, but he
He
was a
was a
section
sergeant.
leader. Yeah, and Josh had an immense amount of experience before, and also is famously intelligent. And it turned out he was incredibly good at intelligence gathering. And so, because of that, this E5 became a major source of intelligence that was passed through MNFI for the entire sector. But it was just because leaders could identify who had skills and place them and let them do what they needed to do.
Yeah, specifically, it's funny because as time has gone on, my memory has actually improved. When I first got home, I was whacked out, so my memory
Mm-hmm.
was affected by
Mm-hmm.
it. But um, I remember walking by that cat, Kinzer,
Mm-hmm.
sergeant at the time, and he started rapping in Arabic. He's got that wicked Southern thing. And then all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden he starts speaking Arabic. And I was like, whoa, whoa, stop. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
bro, where did you learn how to speak Arabic? And his
Mm-hmm.
chain of command had him go to like a little short thing on conversational Arabic. And immediately went back and told the commander, it's like, we got a cat who can speak Arabic. And it kind of, we would just turn people loose if, like you
Mm-hmm.
said, there was no, that was as the deployment went on, my rank became a hindrance, meaning, I don't need people standing up when I'm going into these
Mm-hmm.
shitholes where these guys are sleeping and trying to stand at parade rest and all that
Mm-hmm.
nonsense. And that was a turning point for my leadership style. When we started taking casualties,
Mm-hmm.
I realized I don't need, I'm going to become irrelevant if I keep on with the pomp and
Mm-hmm.
circumstance aspect of being a CSM.
Mm-hmm.
And the colonel, he was never that way to begin with. He was more of a servant leader, and I learned a lot about leadership from him, which is something that normally the officer NCO relationship, when
Mm-hmm.
you're a first sergeant, you obviously you better know more than a young captain. But when you become a battalion level leader, the two have similar experiences. And that's one of the things that when that, I guess, that kind of burden of this, it wasn't a really, or it was interfering, the rank thing interfered sometimes with being able to talk to somebody that you needed to
Mm-hmm.
talk to. And over time, that the pomp and circumstance of the rank became less and less prevalent. And the guys knew, look, if we're coming out here, we're coming out here because we want to talk to you. We want to have a conversation. We're not here to, quiz you on freaking promotion board questions and shit like that. We're not doing stump the dummy.
Yeah, those decisions, they lent a really personal value to the unit. That paratrooper units are always very different, again, because the nature of what happens on the ground after a parachute insertion. But it does date back to World War II and those experiences as, again, kind of a generational memory or organizational memory. And I found it fascinating seeing that in action today in the modern battlefield. Iraq was an incredibly diverse and he, I stumble so many words.
Well, no,
It was such a I'm trying. The word is despair. No, what diffuse. It's diffuse battle space. That you needed that flexibility both on the ground and with command to let troops be where they are, and then find where the what's going on, and then adapt and flex on it. And speaking of adaptability, the entire Turkey Bowl operation, which resulted in 2 weeks in January taking out a major terrorist training camp, finding one of, if not the largest weapons cache of the war, finding links to Iran through that weapons cache, setting up the battle for Baqubah. Turkey was no small. It was no small engagement, and it all began during a command overflight that you and Colonel Pappas and some of our other high command were on. I was told that after the first cache was uncovered, Y'all landed the Black Hawk, got out, and just held it until forces could come meet you. Things like
So
that are
here's
pretty unheard of in the army.
the story with that was I was not actually with those guys.
Mm, mm,
And what the here's how, as we say, what had happened was
mm,
they went down and got inserted. It was Colonel Pappas and all the company commanders and first
mm,
sergeants, and I'm sure there was some other junior. I've talked to some junior guys that ended up somehow strap hanging on that.
mm,
And the next thing I know, I'm getting a call that Major Sylvia is on the HLZ and he wants 3 whiteboards and some other shit because, and so I go to over there to talk to him and I was like, where's the colonel? And he's like, he's
mm,
down in Turkey. And I'm like, what's the enemy situation? Well, the enemy's starting to build up. They're starting to, and I'm like, you
mm,
got to be shitting me. So, that's kind of my job is I got to keep, he and I would kind of keep an eye on each other.
mm,
Um, so now I'm separated from my commander, and quickly he came up with a plan, Major Sylvia and I, to bring the rest of the squadron
mm,
down. And of course, as we started to try to move down, we started losing trucks like it was nobody's
mm,
business.
mm,
Uh, I don't know how many trucks. I ended up getting blown up. I was frustrated that we weren't moving fast enough. So I got out,
mm,
put my hand, you guys need to move this and move. Then somebody ran
mm,
over an AT mine and I got blown up later that
mm,
day. Um, but we ended up, as we were starting to move into that sector, I realized that they had obstacles that were reminiscent of what I had trained for in the 80s against the
mm,
Soviet army, where there were turning and blocking obstacles, which is not part of what goes on.
mm,
That's conventional type stuff where they use dozers and they were pushing us into these minefields. And I don't
mm,
remember how long it took us to finally get down there. But I mean, one of the stories that resonates is that as they were down there and the enemy started showing up in motorcycles, their
mm,
plan was to make it look like there were more of them than there were. So they were running around and popping their heads up. And Tim Matheny told me that General Pappas had one of those like mints, those Starlight mints, one piece of candy, and he offered.
mm,
They obviously didn't have any chow or anything like that, and he's like, "Hey, man, I'll give you half of this uh, piece of candy," which is that summarizes the type of leader that he was. I mean, that he is still obviously today. But yeah, that was everybody has a different side of that story. But
mm,
I will tell you this, that I was quite nervous. And I remember, I want to say it was Captain Dobbins that was in the forward portion of the
mm,
movement down there. But I was like, we got to get down there. This isn't going to look good.
mm.
If my commander's surrounded by the enemy and we can't get down there and get after it. And that's kind of how that whole thing started.
Yeah, that entire situation was insane to me. I got involved in a very close range, like less than 75 feet away firefight with two gentlemen who had been, like, why do I say gentlemen? Anyway, these assholes had been surrendering, and then when we went to detain them, they just picked up their firearms and started trying to kill us. Unfortunately, the ambushes that killed Captain Dennison and Captain Schiller. It was a serious thing out of nowhere. It turns out later that training camp had started up in the 80s and was an anti-Saddam training camp. So talking back about Cold War tactics, that's exactly what they did, and they still had things left over from the Iran-Iraq War that they'd been building up to be their own breakaway place, and that wasn't something you expected to find in Iraq at the time. It was a completely new thing. Intelligence, as far as I know anyway, hadn't said that this was going to be your fight. Just seeing how the squadron was able to develop that fight and turn it into something bigger, and see how that laid the groundwork for the Diyala side of Arrowhead Ripper. I don't believe I'm exaggerating that. I really do think that the shaping operations and Turkey campaign that we did really contributed to Arrowhead Ripper when they went back to Baqubah later.
Yeah, during the after we so I remember distinctly uh a lot of the Alpha Troop contact resulted in these fake surrenders. They
Mm-hmm.
had hand grenades. I don't remember if it was Sergeant Gonzalez's platoon or which
Mm-hmm.
platoon, but I
Yes, that
remember,
was my platoon. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm like, this is bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
We need to start wrecking these. And prior that was a turning point where we took the gloves off. I mean,
Hmm.
we never really had the gloves on actually, but
Hmm.
when we masked every single asset that we had available, which was
Hmm.
not characteristic of other organizations. That was the first night that we started to use 500-pound bombs, and then it, of
Hmm.
course, went up from there with the all the sorts of weapons that we used. But that allowed us to establish how we were going to operate in
Hmm.
future situations. And the second Turkey Bowl became something that Colonel and I had trained, Colonel Pappas and I had trained for years before. It
Hmm.
became a conventional environment where we push the enemy. It's like a dream come true to push the enemy into an engagement area
Hmm.
and then just wreak havoc, which is, we did the shaping operations. We
Hmm.
prepped the battlefield with artillery, all things that I never thought I would ever do over there. Stuff that I was like, oh man, this is exactly what, and he and I would have these conversations. I'm like, I never thought that this would happen, that we would, because normally, and if you speak to other people, they're usually chasing two or three people around. They never get a large enemy element into an engagement area. In fact, I think it was Turkey Bowl one. In fact, I know it was when we had a platoon size element at night moving towards the fob in a wedge, an
Yes.
overhead
Yes.
feed. And I knew then, I said, we got a different situation than my previous trips over there.
Hmm. No, they were incredibly well trained and well disciplined and well equipped. Um, One of the tactical aspects of Turkey One that I really found interesting was the way command decisions did incorporate suggestions from everyone. I forget where the suggestion came from, but when we found out that they were using those deep irrigation trenches as bunkers and trenches, and that most of them were filled with vegetation to hide in and with caches and places for ambushes. I was ambushed out of one with then Sergeant Patterson. Uh, they shot our truck up and tried to throw grenades down our turret. After that, finding out that was a problem, the call went out for solutions on how do we assault these trenches or deny the enemy using these fortifications with what we have. And I forget who came up with the solution, but it was to, if you burn out the bush, they can't hide in the bush. Well, how do you do that? Well, we have refuelers. Someone came up with the idea. We got refuelers and got our Delta Company refuelers into the battle on the front lines of it, working to deny the enemy fortifications. Just seeing how that thought process went and then materialized into an actual tactic that was used that contributed to shaping the entire battle. That was really interesting to see in real time.
Yeah, and
Oh.
Delta Company not only was important in the vegetation, but we were able to restore lateral mobility. If
Mm-hmm.
you remember I think the canals ran north, south, or east. I don't know what
Mm-hmm.
direction. And we were looking, Major Sylvia and I and the Colonel, we were all looking at the map, a paper map, which was hilarious. I mean, we had all this technology, and dude, we were
Mm-hmm.
old school in it with a paper map. And they realized quickly that we were losing freedom to maneuver due to the way that the canals were running. And that's when Delta
Mm-hmm.
Company came down with those platforms. And
Mm,
the other
yeah.
problem, as you probably know all too well, the angle at which we were trying to engage the
Mm-hmm.
enemy, the 50 cal, we weren't, so
Yes.
we started
Mm-hmm.
using Marks 47, I think is what they would call those grenade launchers.
Yeah.
And dudes with 240s. I mean, we were saws. We weren't able to
Mm-hmm.
use the 50 cals effectively, so we came up with
Mm-hmm.
other ways to engage the enemy.
Yeah, I remember.
Or
I
you
believe
guys
there's a
did.
I believe there's a drone footage of Patrick. What's Patrick? I'm forgetting his last name. He was a kid in Blue Platoon. He and Shane Bates went out with 203s and hand grenades to take out guys in trenches. And somewhere we have a video of someone hitting a home run with a hand grenade with that. It was just incredibly intense experience. I have about 5 minutes left. Do you want to wrap quick? Do you want to do another session?
It's up to you.
I've got I've got as much time as you need. I love having these chats, and they're stories that need to be told. I did want to ask you a little bit about what you're doing after with veterans care and helping people, come home again. But also, I wanted to bring up, I didn't realize it at the time when we were saying that people were handpicked or chosen or tried to come to the unit because they wanted to be there. That includes you as well, because you were getting ready to retire before 9/11, and you decided to extend your Army career after 9/11, which I find interesting. 9/11 is the entire reason I joined the military as well. But I just think that's a story that's interesting. Even our leaders, well, I don't know. Why don't you tell a little bit about that?
So I was teaching ROTC at the time at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff uh, when 9/11 happened.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I mean, that was something else. Obviously, I'm on a college campus with rubber ducks and plastic helmets and a prick 77. And I told these kids, I said, this bullshit is over. We're about to, it's going to be like something you can't even imagine. So we started to, it allowed me to train these people who I knew were going to be deployed. I stayed there a little while longer, and then I went to the Sergeant's Major Academy in 2004. And when I finished, it was supposed to be a 9-month class, and it was a six back then. They don't do this anymore, but I was selected straight to become a CSM. Normally, they choose people to be sergeant's major now, and then they constantly change it. But anyway, I was selected to be a CSM, and I went to Fort Drum shortly after I graduated and went straight over to Mosul, Iraq,
Mm.
about 3 weeks after I arrived there. And it was shortly after I came back from there that it was like, you can't even make this up. I had a flip phone, and then it was
Mm.
Department of the Army. It was like a movie. They're like, hey, Sergeant Major, we need you to go back to Bragg. I'm like, what am I, John
Mm.
Rambo here? So,
Mm.
um,
Mm.
and sure enough, it was, they explained to me the reconnaissance units that were standing up. But yeah, I knew Sharon and I were at a concert down in Phoenix, and it was a Martina McBride concert.
Mm.
And there was some sort of patriotic song playing, probably had a little too much bourbon. And I looked at her and I said, I'm not getting out, right? She's
Mm.
like, yeah, I know. So I went, and honest, if I'm being honest, that it was kind of something that I always wanted to deploy with paratroopers. I knew it would be
Mm.
different, and it was a good, positive experience with the 10th Mountain Division when I went over with those guys. But
Mm.
I always knew in the back of my mind that I wanted to go back with the 82nd if the opportunity presented itself.
Yeah, it's funny what a little bit of bourbon does to you. It makes you re-enlist and things like that. But no, that's amazing. Um, so I got about 2 minutes before it'll cut us off. Why don't we talk for just a second about whatever, and then I'll send you a new link after that so we can talk about Travis Mills and the Path Foundation and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'll go back to that hand grenade
Mm.
discussion that you
Mm.
had earlier. And it was no more apparent to me than anybody that all the resupply requests that we were sending up and I was unloading with my
Mm.
freaking broke down body,
Mm.
cases and cases of hand grenades. So
Mm.
the Blackhawks would come first. It started, we were asking for hand grenades and they kept bringing Humvee tires, which we also needed. And I
Yeah.
grabbed that crew chief and I said, if you bring one more load of tires down here, I'm going to smash your skull. And the kid
Mm.
said, we need hand grenades. So to think that we were in such dire straits and I remember it was Matheny. I was like, bro, I can't keep unloading these hand grenades. I need some help. So it was me and him and some other guys that kept unloading these aircraft cases. So in my Humvee, I had cases of hand grenades and cases of Otis Spunkmeyer muffins. That was the
Boy.
funniest. The
Mm.
whole back seat was
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
that shit.
Sorry, one sec. We got 30 seconds left. So and I got a train. I live next to tracks, and it's horrible.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let this run out real quick. Call Angel because she's looking for a ride, and then I'll send you a new link right after that.
Okay.
So you were just talking about, sorry, what were we just talking about? Like, why don't we start off there? Because I thought that was a really interesting thread to go down with, you know, how people influence each other, both leaders and learning from everyone underneath you as well.
Yeah, the one thing that it's funny that the senior enlisted advisor to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, John Troxel, fellow CSM, was over there when with us. He was in charge of I believe it was 4-2 Striker Brigade,
Mm-hmm.
and he was the CSM of the brigade. And as he was getting ready to give the speech to 573 for their most recent ball, the final ball, he's like, he calls, said, "Hey, anything, any message you want to give?" And I was like, I wanted you to thank everybody. And we got into a kind of a side conversation. And one of the things he talked about was that every time that he came to visit us, that I had a positive attitude, that our organization had a positive attitude. And I have realized, and I knew it even when I was over there, that if I didn't, I struggled more if I wasn't around everyone,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that second that I got alone, all the things that were happening started to kind of build up on me. And it's hard, you when you're not part of a team, a small team, it's just me and the boss kind of sometimes
Mm-hmm.
on an island going out. I didn't realize the impact that it was having as I look back on it now, to be able to go down and be with units, like and go on a patrol with Cole led a patrol that I went on, in other other I was with Alpha Troop a bunch of times for different parts of missions. And I realized I don't know that that happens in other units where it's like this, everybody's motivating everybody. There was just so much energy. And I can remember Charlie Troop, I went out with them and they'd start this thing where everybody put their arms around each other and everybody would start rocking back and forth. And everyone there, I believe, in my experience, felt like they were part of a team, a part of something
Mm-hmm.
larger than themselves. And I think you know, General Petraeus came down
Mm-hmm.
specifically directly to our squadron.
Mm-hmm.
I think initially to check on us to see, like, this is after we had taken quite a few casualties, and find out what it is that we were doing that was keeping us in the fight. And I look
Mm-hmm.
back now and I was like, that we didn't know any other way. That we weren't
Mm-hmm.
going to quit, that there was no quit in any of us. And that went down from the top to the bottom. I never,
Mm-hmm.
there was nothing that we couldn't have accomplished. And
Mm-hmm.
I knew it at the time, but that was just my job. But now I look back at it and that is not indicative, I think, of all units.
Yeah, yeah, I do remember very clearly when I would go on patrols. We'd sometimes get tag along leaders, and they would stop at different situations and they would ask your opinions. And at first, it kind of confused me. I wasn't sure if it was like a gut test, like, is this right or wrong? But then I realized, no, they really do want to hear opinions. And even though they might not do whatever the suggestion was, it was being heard and it was being considered as part of the process, and that was really important. I mean, we actually had tactics change because E5s or below would bring up ideas or have a different take on something that had happened or an idea. I again talking about Delta Company, they built bridges and out of pallets and other things just for mobility. And a lot of that came on the fly of, hey, we have a need. How do we fix it? And it's because everyone was engaged in the fight and there was a trust that if you had an idea and said it to a leader, it wasn't going to be discarded. You weren't going to be laughed at. That's a really important aspect that I really don't see in a lot of other units.
No, when you mentioned it on the last, when we spoke last, and this is something that I quickly realized, is that it wasn't just that the thing that one of the things that I remember when I first arrived, back in the day, the Army had started to change basically from the time that I went into the time when we were all together. But our unit was the way it was when I first was in the 82nd. I remember a kid in Charlie Troop was starting to shoot outside of the range fans with his machine gun, and the
Mm.
NCO whacked him with the paddle. And I'm
Mm.
like, I'm gonna like it here. And then the chaplain ended up getting arrested basically by the security forces guys because he crossed the yellow line. He was jump master, part of the jump master team.
Mm.
We're trying to load an aircraft.
Yeah,
And they're like, we have your chaplain detained. And I'm like, I definitely love this unit. I got
I remember
my
that.
chaplains getting hemmed up. It was but where I was going with that is I quickly realized how intelligent it was. This couple things that stand out. The funniest unit I ever by far was in. Like every unit's funny,
Mhm.
right? Everybody's got funny people, but people were hilarious in that unit.
Mhm.
People were highly intelligent. It was like all the things
Mhm.
that you need to be resilient, emotional intelligence, mature image. We were very immature behaving sometimes. I saw something, you and JRTC, for example, and other things that all of us had done. Uh, but at the same time, I'm pretty sure that all of those characteristics probably led to us being very resilient after all
Mhm.
those experiences that we had.
I honestly credit a lot of that to just being an airborne unit. When you jump together, that changes dynamics. There, I talked with Amy a little bit about it. It's not that rank doesn't matter when you're jumping, but it takes it matters less when you're all together on a chalk or a stick. When you're waiting on a door, anyone can cause a correction, and that's why we always push to have E4s going to jump master training, because you need every eye on board. Because when you go out the bird, your rank doesn't matter until your feet hit the ground. Anything in between, any mistake, that's going to get someone injured or killed. And so you rely on your friends and at all levels. Even if the fresh private sees something's wrong, people listen to them. And I remember seeing, I don't have names to put with it, unfortunately, but I do remember seeing, staff sergeants that would grab a fresh private and have them do, their basic airborne school kind of JMPI on other unit leaders, just to see if they could find a gig. And if nothing else, at least get the experience of looking someone over like that. And that was a really good experience. Um, I didn't go very high in the military, but after I got out, I did a lot of studying in counterterrorism. I went to AMU for counterterrorism. Uh, what the hell? Apparently, we're having a SWAT thing next door. There's police. Okay, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, if they start shooting, I get the AK. I'll get that out. But uh, oh yeah, sorry, my train of thought there was just that ability to influence others on the way down, but also be influenced on the way up, translates beyond unit leadership. It goes into coordinating with other units, talking with like Ty and some other people who have gone to special forces or worked with foreign countries or worked with like our Iraqi augmentees. Again, we were never a training unit for Iraqis, but we were given a bunch of augmentees halfway through tour and had to find ways to integrate them into the unit. And most of them didn't speak any English. I remember on my part of it, I would just pull gate guard at night with Iraqis and trade English for Arabic. And then after a while, I'd start teaching them how to use night vision or thermal scopes. And it was always a caveat of you have to be standing here with me so I know where the equipment is. But I would always teach them, with this, you can see Wahhabi and you can kill Wahhabi before he can kill you. And they loved that. And I just, for on my own personal experience with that, they grew as soldiers by being around us and our influence. And the more that we worked with them, they understood two things: that there was a trust that was building between us, and they would trust that if they had trouble, then they could, we would respond. And that they really turned them around. By the time we left, our Iraqi augmentees were, I'm trying to think of the right adjective. They were a more effective than they had been. I actually don't want to talk bad about them. They put in as much heart as a lot of our paratroopers did. But again, it was because of that sharing of leadership skills and influence up and down. And it just, even our local talking to the sheiks and muhtars, local leaders, if you a lot of units would come into places and say this is how it's going to be, and with especially that culture, you can't do that. That's not how they operate. They'll say yes and then go and plant a bomb afterwards. But if you allow that exchange of ideas and influence and respect, it really does change the fight. And it showed. The results showed when we left Diyala. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that made our unit unique was our ability to gather our own intel and then act.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we weren't built to close with and destroy the enemy on a larger scale like we were doing. Normally we would find and fix and not destroy unless it was a small kind of counter reconnaissance type of thing. And I think that's what made us unique was our ability to gather. Everything we were doing was intel driven. We weren't just some units, quite frankly, might drive down a road and just look just to see what's going to happen. That they're not going out. And I hear that a lot with the students that come through the program where I work. They will complain that they never knew what was going on. They didn't trust their chain of command. They weren't adequately trained. All of those things, I don't feel like were a part of anything that had to do with our organization.
Yeah, I remember just that flexibility and the way things were put together. I don't remember if, because I know the unit was split up at first, and we did a lot of operations in Alpha Troop that were different from the rest of Squadron. But we had intel that came down the pipe. I think it was from CAG. I think there was someone that CAG had been looking for, high value target, and they were not able to find him. He kept, every time they'd go somewhere, it was a dry hole. So they finally passed the intel to us saying, look, we don't want to waste our time, but you can waste yours. And he was hiding like not on an island, but it was separated by the river on 3 sides. So if you go in, he can squirt away, or it's ambushes or whatever. So Captain Few talked around and just decided we're gonna find us a rowboat. And he took half of Alpha Troop across a river in a rowboat in the middle of the night to go and find this guy. And I don't believe we actually ended up finding him, but just that initiative, that idea of, here's the obstacle, but how do you get around that? That was a really interesting thing to see and to be a part of.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to make sure that I don't forget to talk about kind of how my time in that unit shaped, obviously I had extensive leadership experience prior to arriving there, but a lot of it was a lot of book oriented stuff in the absence of any emotion other than maybe anger or rage. And it was because of the experiences that I had over there that I feel like I started to realize that there was a place for empathy and compassion when people were struggling with, had just lost somebody that they cared about. And over time, it made me, I was striving to be a better leader in the sense that people would want to talk to me and not be like, here's that asshole and all he worries about is iPro. And, there was an element of that I had to do. But what that experience taught me from being around everybody over there was that we would never quit. We would never, there was no challenge that we weren't going to meet, and we were going to work together. No one was ever alone, and we were never going to leave anybody behind. I remember during one of those shaping operations, the colonel and I went in with, I think the whole squadron was placed in different areas in one of those air assaults, and we couldn't get everybody out. He and I ended up getting out on one of the lifts, and some of the other people were still there, and the enemy was all over the place. And I remember the general we were working for, he looks at me and he's like, "Hey, Sergeant Major, do they have cold weather gear?" I said, "Sir, they're surrounded by the enemy. That shit isn't going to help them." And then Colonel Pappas then went in and had a closed door discussion, and some other aviation assets were utilized to get our unit out of there. That type of stuff didn't happen. I mean, no one was the length that the colonel would go to, and he and I both try to safeguard our paratroopers was, I mean, clearly we weren't a risk averse unit, but we weren't gonna
Mhm.
do something stupid like, separate the unit and then leave them behind because the winds were so high, the
Mhm.
standard Blackhawks couldn't fly. So we were able to get somebody else to go in there and get those guys out.
Mhm. I remember that. Yeah, I was on that operation, and that was an interesting one for me because Intel had kind of mixed things up and dropped us in a UXO field at night. But that's what I love about Iraq. You never knew what was going to happen. Um, but also, to touch on the command experience of that, especially when we started losing casualties. We lost a lot of casualties. We had 22 of our own killed. I, I think 120 wounded. But then we also lost we attachments and augmentees. Good God, I don't know how many augmentees were killed. Uh, just it was a very tough fight, and some of the ambushes, some of the things that we went through, and it was it wasn't they weren't preventable losses, but also that's something that as command weighs on you, and it has to weigh on you. And I don't know if that's something you want to talk about or if you're comfortable talking about that, but I know you and Colonel Pappas you were there for every time we lost someone, every memorial that we had to go to. I mean, it's that has to be a big burden on your shoulders.
Yeah, that was by far the more difficult aspect of that deployment. And I don't know that everybody knows this, but each time one of our guys was killed, we went to the morgue and
Mm.
we put their awards on their body bags.
Mm-hmm.
And there were days when I was just like, man, we, obviously there wasn't any tactical errors that were contributing to this, but just the just having to do that over and over again. So, like on a good day, we would go to the hospital and I would see a kid that was severely wounded, things I had never imagined in my lifetime that I would see, these kids that I cared about. And a lot of the parents, I remember before we went over there, hey, make sure you keep my son safe, to include the colonel's dad pulled me aside.
Mm.
And that I started to that started to affect me really. I was having to obviously bury it. We would get flown off the battlefield to the hospital or to the
Mm-hmm.
morgue, and I would remember, we'd land more often than not. It was at night, and we would get transported by a bus, and I can remember the sound of the gravel walking into the morgue and the smell in the morgue, and it became increasingly more difficult for me to bury that shit,
Mm-hmm.
so that I wouldn't go back and appear to be broken.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that took me a long time. It obviously still is difficult
Mm-hmm.
to talk about, but it was just that was when I didn't understand it then, but I do now that
Mm-hmm.
I cared so deeply. We both cared so deeply for these people. It was like losing a family member. I
Mm-hmm.
didn't understand the relationship. I grew up in a home where my dad was a World War II veteran. And
Mm-hmm.
so there wasn't a lot of discussions about emotions in my family. So I didn't even
Mm-hmm.
understand as an adult sometimes what I was feeling. And when I realized that I developed a sense of parenting type of leadership instead of this type of, you're going to do what I say because if you don't, then this is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And when you turn that corner and you start to really embrace all your people and then you start to take these losses, it's a significant, it takes a toll and took a toll
Mm-hmm.
on both the commander and I. And obviously we didn't have a whole lot of time to discuss it while we were over there.
Mm-hmm.
That was that was hard. I mean, I started having nightmares. I didn't know I was doing that until I was one night we were back on Caldwell and Sergeant Mock and a few other guys were in a room beside the room that I was in, and I guess I was screaming and throwing shit all over the room. I didn't. I was unaware of it, and they woke me up and or they knocked on the door, and I was like, "What?" They're like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, "Well, you're in here screaming," and And I was like, well, is this the first time? Well, you did it 3 nights
Mm-hmm.
ago, but we didn't want to tell you because we thought we would chew our ass. And I was like, well, Jesus Christ, but it was,
Mm-hmm.
and I look back now and it's because I felt a lack of control, meaning
Yeah.
that there was nothing,
Mm-hmm.
the only way to not take casualties was to not do our job. And that's not
Mm-hmm.
how we were wired. So it was just every day I was, holding on to, please
Mm-hmm.
don't let this be, let us get through a day where someone doesn't get injured or someone doesn't get killed. And it became kind of, I pushed it into the background of my mind, but it was there. It was like a monster. And it's still, that type of stuff still affects me, today when I think about all of those experiences that I mean, everybody experienced them, obviously, but like you said, it was being in that job. I didn't know that. Like, there's not a lot of difference between how you guys, the junior soldiers that went over there, not knowing what to expect, and then someone like myself and the commander. No one ever said, like, I got educated when there's a KIA in your unit, this is the notification process,
Mm-hmm.
right? But no one ever said, hey, you're going to be, I mean, I suppose it would be common sense that you're going to go and check on your people that were wounded, or you're going to go to the morgue. But there's nothing that I could have done to prepare myself for,
Mm-hmm.
over and over again, that type of experience. But and at the same time, that's where we needed to be. He and I were the last ones
Mm-hmm.
to see those the guys before they went back to Dover. So we made
Mm-hmm.
sure that everything was tight. And but yeah, it was for sure impactful. And he and I have talked about those things before.
Mm-hmm. Well, it compounds the pressure and psychological side of it because the higher in rank you are, you have to put up a face of strength for everyone. If it looks like you are breaking down or having too emotional, that can affect everyone else. But at the same time, we're all human. The military, especially combat, forces you into these really strange places of humanity where it's very rigid in one way. You don't have a lot of time to be human, but also we still are. And that cognitive dissonance that happens, on my level, it hurt losing friends, but also in a way, none of it was my decision. You know what I mean? None of it was, I didn't have any guilt about this movement here, or what if we'd done this, or did we need to do that patrol or whatever. Um, so I can't imagine, because even if it's not reality, it still is in your mind that, did I do something wrong? Was there, even training? How does, how does this, my choices influence this, even if it didn't? It's a very difficult thing to cope with. I
Yeah, and
will say though. Oh, sorry.
well, even I realized it took me a long time to figure this out that I always thought guilt was black and white. Like you and I go
Mm-hmm.
in the room and I don't pull my trigger fast
Mm-hmm.
enough, you get killed. But it's more of for me, I didn't even realize I had any sort of guilt until
Mm-hmm.
Adam King was in my vehicle. We were down at Fort Bragg. I'd been inducted into the 73rd Regimental, whatever it was, and a distinguished member of the regiment. And we were talking about our stuff, and he's like,
Mm-hmm.
do you have any guilt? And I looked at him, and at that moment, I realized that I had processed a lot of other things, and then I was ready to
Mm-hmm.
examine that it wasn't guilt in the sense that it was guilt in the sense of the totality of the entire situation.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. Like,
Oh yeah.
that, holy shit, we we never did anything wrong necessarily, that where you,
Mm-hmm.
you would think of guilt, but guilt in the sense that I felt, I was responsible for these people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at the same time, we all knew it, what we were there to do, and I could have been killed as easily as anyone else. And that was one of the things that the commander, he made sure that we were always on the battlefield so that, we
Mm-hmm.
shared. And experiences. I mean, he got blown up, I got blown up. So it took me a while to kind of sort that out. But yeah, there's this
Mhm.
weird, I don't know, I guess it would be like, I don't have kids, so, but I guess it would be like a parent, your kid goes off to
Mhm.
college and something happens to him or whatever. Um, but yeah, those experiences of loss took me, I still am processing all of that
Mhm.
stuff.
It's difficult, and I mean, sometimes we don't ever find answers. I know I went through my own process and came to my own zen. um, and like you were saying, one of the reactions to stopping that pain and that feeling is to not fight as hard, but we couldn't do that. That's not what the war was about. That's not what Iraq was about. I don't like to name names, even though it's been almost 20 years. But another unit that we served alongside of did that. They came in, they got hit hard because the enemy knew that they were new. And when they saw the vulnerabilities, they retreated back to the main fob, and they didn't patrol aggressively. They didn't take the fight out aggressively, and the end result of that was Baqubah almost entirely falling to Al Qaeda, and then they lost more people because Al Qaeda controls your battle zone. So that balance between that balance between what you think might protect you might not actually protect you, but also knowing that pushing harder could potentially lose more people. It's a really delicate thing to deal with on a personal level. But I was always really proud that we continued pushing no matter what. I know we just kind of incorporated the losses as being a reason to keep pushing. um,
Yeah, and that's honestly, what General Petraeus came down to
mm-hmm,
ask. Like, how are you guys? He asked me directly, how are you staying in
mm-hmm,
the fight? And I was like, sir, we don't have a choice. We came
mm-hmm.
here to get shit done. We're gonna get shit done.
Yeah.
And that that was, and I remember he said if everybody was fighting the way this unit fought,
Mm-hmm,
this war would have been over already. And it was just
mm-hmm,
I, a lot of I realized, like I said before we even went over there, that we were a special, and I knew General Pappas and Major Sylvia were the best officers I had ever served with,
mm-hmm,
bar none. And as time went on and we continued to get tested,
mm-hmm,
everybody started to rise further and further and in fact, I mean, I look at those spectacular attacks as they were referred to
mm-hmm,
as an indication that the enemy knew that we weren't leaving. And even after
mm-hmm.
that, we took the fight to their ass. There was never, um, I think the way that, as you said, the enemy knew more. I think people didn't realize that they knew what we were all doing, where we
Mm-hmm.
were, because we were living in and amongst the enemy. So to go back in the
Oh
fog
yes.
and hide, they know.
I even picked up a little bit of Arabic thanks to the augmentees and just messing around at night. And on patrols, I used that often to talk to locals when I could. And I found that the locals in the area, they knew what unit was at what patrol base, even though we're wearing the same uniform with the same patches. They knew that the different patrol bases in different towns had different leaders and different styles. Um, I know a lot of times I won't use any slurs, but people say the Iraqis were, all low intelligent enemies, but they were not, and that's why there was a lot of problems during the war. They continued to underestimate a lot of how it was fought. Um,
Yeah, I remember
sorry.
one of the things that, you know, obviously there were times when every time we went down the road, we didn't know what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm,
And we started to go subsurface and go
mm-hmm,
out with small kill teams. And I remember I was like, you
mm-hmm,
think you're going to terrorize us? We're going to
mm-hmm,
right back at you, because they had no idea where we were. And when we
mm-hmm,
started doing subsurface stuff and setting up those small kill teams,
mm-hmm.
that was an opportunity for us to shift the dynamic on traditional warfare.
Yeah, we're running low on time again. God, there's so much to talk about. I I'll maybe one day I'll get old Mike Few to talk about when they were sending notes on IEDs back and forth with the IED emplacer. They were They were actually communicating with memes and notes on bombs, which is crazy. Um, I did. Oh God. Oh, I was gonna say, uh, touching back on just some of the emotional side of things, because I want to give you time to talk about Travis Mills and all that. Um, people have asked me before about, did I kill anyone? Did you shoot at anyone? Honestly, I only engaged with my small arms, I don't know, 2 or 3 times. With the Bradley, I shot at some people, but it's not the times that I was actively engaging with an enemy that I remember as vividly as the times when I didn't, but I wanted to. And I did not, because the discipline that we had built as a team and the leaders that were around us and what they'd instilled in us gave me it allowed me to be aggressive when we needed to be aggressive, but also to stay my hand when it didn't feel right. And I'm thankful, because in several of those incidences that I remember, I would have been wrong if I had engaged. And I put a lot of credit to our training and our leaders, and just how the kind of command climate within the unit that provided me that training. So I want to talk to you real quick. After you retired, you started working with the Travis Mills Foundation, helping veterans with psychological needs.
Yeah, so I work at a program called Warrior PATHH. It's progressive and alternative training for helping heroes. And essentially, we teach the science of post-traumatic growth. And it's based on what they learned from the survivors of the Hanoi Hilton, had a
Mm,
lower incidence of post-traumatic stress diagnoses than those that were in the field. And they tied it back to the type of leadership that was by James Stockdale and the other leaders that were inside the Hanoi Hilton, and also based on concentration camp survivors and other people who had these significant events in their lives, loss of a loved one. And essentially what you learn is that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
mhm,
And until you I realized when I was struggling, I was behaving like a victim. I was like, you didn't have it as bad as me.
mhm,
You have no idea. My unit did this, and and the reality is that I needed to tap into the same resources that we all tapped into during that deployment. And then even going back even further, I had a very difficult childhood where I learned a lot about burying emotions and protecting
mhm,
myself and uh, those types of things. So what we teach are a variety of wellness practices. I was never a fan of medication. Like when I first
mhm,
sought help, I was having panic attacks where my legs would I would have trouble moving my legs. I was having trouble breathing. I was having trouble driving. I think Amy Rogers met when I
mhm,
came home. I was looking for IEDs, obviously, everywhere. So those symptoms were causing me I wasn't getting any sleep. I was in a lot
mhm,
of physical pain. And this program gave me something different than it's not therapy. It's 7 days of training where we teach people how to reframe how they look at their experiences and what lessons
mhm,
they can take from them. And then we teach practices for emotional regulation. Like I used to get angry and would be enraged for days, violent, breaking stuff.
mhm,
And that's obviously not who I want to be as a man. And over time, and it confounded me. I'm like, how in the hell can I be so disciplined to have a full, 27 years in the army, and now
mhm,
if I get cut off in traffic, I want to freaking do a pit maneuver and stomp somebody's guts out. That's I realized that there's a place for that, but that the United States of America is probably not where I need to be having those thoughts. So
mhm,
the things that we teach help with the emotional regulation necessary to process these experiences that we had. If you'd have asked
mhm,
me before about those casualties, I would have told you this is how many we had, these are the awards that they received. I wouldn't have said, you know, this person was married to this person was somebody's son. I didn't want to touch the emotional parts of these. And now I can do that. I mean, is it pleasant? You know, no, it's going to be difficult, but I have the skills to be able to realize why it's the emotions that are attached to it that make this the thing difficult. Like you said, it wasn't things we did to the enemy that doesn't keep me up at night. What keeps me up at night is that I lost people that I loved, and I didn't. You know, it took me a long time to piece that shit together.
It's a very difficult thing, I know, just kind of culturally as well in America, especially with men. You know, we're not supposed to cry, we're not supposed
Yeah.
to be emotional. uh, I get it, but also, you know, just looking at classical history, Alexander the Great, he stopped his invasion for 3 days to weep when his best friend was killed in battle. You know, one of the greatest generals in the history of mankind, and he was able to manage his own emotions in a more healthy way. I it's one of the reasons why I like telling stories. A lot of people say they don't like to talk about, you know, Iraq or their service or whatever. It's painful, and you know, but for me, what I've found is the more I talk about it, the more I tell, the more I remember the people that I was around. It is easier for me because it helps my brain sort things out again, and that's why lately I've become very verbal about it. I just I hope more people feel comfortable opening up about their own experiences. You know, even if it's with other veterans or whomever, or if they really need to talk to therapists. I've been to PTSD counseling for several years now. You know, it's not scary, and it doesn't make you weak. In fact, I feel stronger now that I've done it, because now I'm learning to control my emotions in a healthy way. My emotions don't have to control me anymore, and that it makes me feel better as a man.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what we teach our skills so that you're not unhinged like that. That's
Mm-hmm.
embarrassing when you act in a way that's incongruent to your belief system.
Sorry,
And
about 15 seconds left. Sorry, I don't want to cut you off,
no,
but
that's a good thing to end on. You know, that's
mm-hmm.
essentially what we do is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, return people to having some self to be able to use the discipline they already had, the training they've had, and repurpose it
Mm-hmm.
so they can live a better life.
Oh, no, wait, I'm sorry. We have a minute 45. I don't know why it's doing something weird, but it says,
But yeah,
I
so
don't know.
that
It's still recording. Okay, we'll keep talking.
all right.
um,
Yes. So essentially that's kind of what we do. We take combat veterans and first
mm-hmm.
responders, male and female classes are separate. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously you probably know that I would say upwards of 15 of our people from our unit have come through.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always even more difficult, you know, for them. It's something that I need to do, something that we need to do is
Mm-hmm.
to talk about what our experiences were. And
Mm-hmm.
it's definitely more complicated when somebody that I serve with
Mm-hmm.
is in a program. But I wouldn't want them to go anyplace else unless they wanted to. The program is taught at other places,
Mm-hmm.
but so far all of our people have come up here where I am.
Mm-hmm. I know that's great, and I've just known in my own life, the more you help other people, it helps you too. It's like teaching someone. Actually, it is. You're teaching them about emotional stuff, and it you learn from teaching as much as they learn. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that to me that my duty, my responsibility is to, for as long as I can, support the people that supported me in General
Mm-hmm.
Pappas. The loyalty that I feel to all of you guys is profound, and I don't even know that people can fully understand it.